Hi everyone, I'm Dale Smith, aka Journo Dale, and we're here to talk about Canadian politics. All right, we're here with Supriya Dwivedi, former senior advisor to Trudeau, current contributing columnist to the Toronto Star. And we're still kind of talking about, I guess, choices that the government's making and how that's kind of manifested itself in what's in the budget. And one of the things that I thought would be really interesting to talk to Supriya about is just the way in which some of these choices are playing out in terms of Trudeau is very much about investing in people, and Carney seems to be very much invested in things. And I just kind of wanted to maybe explore that a little bit and, get, I guess, your observations from what you kind of saw during your time in Trudeau's office, and how you're kind of seeing that play out now.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first sort of thing that jumped out at me prior to the budget even being tabled, without us knowing, the meat of it,
Yeah.
was the fact that the government only started the negotiation process with the opposition parties after October 21st, which is when interim NDP leader Don Davies had basically called the government out for not yet meeting with the NDP. To the prime minister's credit, shortly thereafter, he swiftly met with all of the opposition leaders.
Yeah.
But to me, that signaled very much yo, this is the budget, take it or leave it. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And it worked out for the government in the end, and
This
kudos to
time.
them. Yeah, right. Kudos to them for that. But it's a marked departure from what you would expect a minority parliament situation to be. Even before the supply and confidence agreement that the Trudeau Liberals would have had with the then Jagmeet Singh led NDP, on
Yeah.
all of that was done before my time and joining the Prime Minister's office. Consultations would happen weeks and weeks in advance. And, every government and every prime minister is going to have a different style and a different take and different priorities, and that's fine and
Yeah.
normal. But to me, it was very much okay. This is a different approach. This is a different strategy of this is what the budget is. So you can blink first, and the opposition blinked first.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And I think that wasn't unexpected. I think I've got some particular thoughts on the NDP having proven that they weren't very good negotiating partners the last time around.
Well, yeah,
Maybe
I
not
mean,
necessarily,
you don't say,
maybe not necessarily engendering enough trust this time around. But things will change in the months ahead when they get new leadership. But
I mean, it's also, I don't think Don Davies went to the prime minister with specific concrete asks either, right? Which
no.
isn't the best negotiating tactic out there.
True enough. But that being said, I also just kind of noted, after the election, Blanchette's like, yeah, we'll give them a year. And then we're not even 6 months in. It's like, here's our six non-negotiables. And,
Yeah.
we're not giving you that year anymore. So that's kind of how those things kind of played out.
Well, I mean, Blanchette in particular sounded kind of miffed, right, at the
Yeah.
way the negotiations went about. I mean, I think he basically said, like, the Power and Politics played this clip when I was on this week of him saying something like it was going to bite the government in the ass eventually,
Yeah.
their approach and their style. And I do tend to agree with that only because in a minority parliament, it's good for you if opposition parties want to work with you and don't want to make the government fall.
True enough. But I also suspect that they kind of used their past this time to push it through, and then they won't have that same kind of runway in future votes.
Yeah.
But you don't want to fold too early. I think is the other the other thing, the other consideration. So I guess with all of that in mind, yeah, I think the notion that that this budget is investing more in things than in people, I think, is is I think something that I don't know if we've really had enough discussion about in the broader context, because I mean I've been reporting on things like the expected cuts at women and gender equality and all the program funding that they're not renewing. I mean, they're saying the department's only getting a 2% reduction target, but is that operational spending or is that program spending? And those are the kinds of questions that I continue to have, because it does signal a shift in priorities from what the previous government was putting forward to compared to what Carney is.
Yeah, and look, even if you were to, I don't know, like very charitably look at the situation, like a little bit zoomed out to say
Mm-hmm.
that, well, the economic situation has obviously changed with, the Trump trade war on Canada and needing to shore up different partners. But, I would just say it's not as though under Trudeau there wasn't a diversification of trade under International Trade Minister Mary Ng at the time, right?
Yeah.
And the other thing I would say is that I think it's fair, for more than fair, for the prime minister and this government to want to do things like shoring up defense, or want to do things that have been previously missed, and I'm putting that in air quotes just because I don't think it was intentional. It just probably
No.
wasn't rising to the top of the priority list at the time. But like, to try and spur investment, right? I think the general approach, and you can see from the budget, and I'm guessing this is Prime Minister Carney's thinking, is, all right, we've done our thing. We're going to do all these things like lower the corporate tax burden, and the like, and make it easier for you to write off, capital expenditures. The whole
Yeah.
thing with SRED credits, or that they've, have now streamlined. And now it's up to you, private sector, to bring in that sweet, sweet money, to
Yeah.
try and get the economy going. And so, look, I think that makes sense. But to your point about the cuts to wage, or even looking at, Lauren Dobson Hughes, who's a very well-known policy wonkish type expert, had
Hmm.
posted to social media noting that the government's own gendered analysis of the budget disproportionately went to men.
And higher income men.
And higher income men at that.
Yeah.
Exactly. So those are the things that I think are the government might, maybe not right now, but eventually is going to have an issue explaining, coupled with, getting rid of things like the increase in the capital gains tax, as well as canceling the digital services tax, as well as, like, and like, these are the
Yeah.
things that are like, well, what about these things? Because, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean,
Sorry, I was
there
rambling
were
there.
certainly signals being sent by canceling the different wealth taxes, and it almost kind of makes me think that,
Like the luxury, like also the luxury tax,
yeah,
right?
yeah, the
Is that what
luxury tax on the yachts
Yeah.
and private jets. And actually, that came up in question period just today, and Melanie Jolie was saying that when we cut it, Bombardier hired 600 more people, and it's
Is
like,
that true?
this is what she said in QP today. So
Interesting. Okay.
so
I'd
I'm
take her at
like,
her word. I don't know.
again, though, I mean, it is sending a signal, but I also kind of wonder if that signal is also kind of hinting a return to kind of trickle down economics,
I hope not.
and everything that implies.
Yeah, look, I really hope not, because one thing that I think, this is true of every government of at every level, I would say, but I think governments have severely underestimated the undercurrent of anger that exists amongst, let's say, the 45 and under ish crowd.
Yeah,
Okay. And again, like, yes, our is it better today in 2025 than it was for a woman my mother's age at the, yeah, sure, fine. But like,
yeah,
when people can't afford rent, when people can't afford, regular day-to-day expenses, when housing is increasingly out of reach for people, like home ownership, I should say, is increasingly
yeah,
out of reach for people, unless you're, borrowing from the bank of mom and dad to some degree or whatever.
yeah.
You get a lot of anger, and people will express that in certain ways. And I don't think it's good for governments when you ignore that. And I fear that is what is happening. And, with your point about perhaps going back to the sense of trickle down economics, I mean, that anger is only going to get compounded and exacerbated.
Well, yeah, and this is my thing with, I mean, Polyev in particular, with his message to youth, his message of hope is just double down on trickle down, even more. Cut taxes, deregulate, and that'll solve all the problems. But like, isn't that what created all of these problems in the first place?
Well, yeah,
Is
and
kind
I
of,
mean,
where my question is.
100%. And I mean, you look at the conservative messaging on things like the school food program, right? Like
Yeah,
it's basically like, oh, fuck them kids, like they'll feed themselves. And it's like, well, no, actually, they're not feeding themselves, and their parents can't afford to feed themselves, and it's an issue. And it's very indicative, I would say, of the current conservative movement that they would plant a flag over "Don't feed hungry children." Like that
yeah.
to me should be basic. And so I agree. Like there is a
Well,
huge problem.
yeah, and at the same time, they're saying don't feed hungry children, but they're at the same time also screaming that baby formula is increased in price and you need to do something. And I'm like, okay, so what? Price controls?
Yeah,
Where's the logical consistency in what you're demanding?
yeah. I mean, to demand consistency from politicians, that's just
That's
yeah,
true.
yeah.
True enough. Um, the other thing I wanted to touch on, which is on a slightly more serious note, is the there is something in the budget which essentially buys into the scapegoating of immigration for a lot of the problems around housing and so on, which I really am concerned about, particularly using the language of taking back control of immigration. And I just wanted to get your take on what you're seeing from this kind of adoption of that language by the government.
Yeah. So look, I think it's worrying. I think it should raise eyebrows that it's very clearly copying the language or mirroring the language used by Nigel Farage. But I would say it's kind of seemingly consistent. We were just talking about inconsistency before. Like it's
Yeah.
seemingly consistent for this government to do that. And let me explain. Like if you look at the whole issue with the price on carbon and the rebate. I mean,
Hmm.
the first thing that this government performatively did was to cosplay an executive order. And like,
Yeah.
yes, I do know it was a PM's decision note. I know what the difference is.
Yes.
But getting the cameras in there, doing the signing, saying that that was like the first thing, basically bought into the conservative rhetoric about it making life unaffordable, which of course we now know it didn't, and you took away the
Didn't.
rebate for people, and so now people don't have the rebate, and it's not as though it substantively or any way brought down the price of groceries that's in any
No.
way noticeable. And then you look at the way this government has treated the reset with India. And, when
Yeah.
you have a representative of India, which is their high commissioner, say to CTV's Vashi Kapelos that the RCMP effectively made up the allegations, and then not have the government then speak out against that and to
Yeah.
repudiate that, is to basically buy into the Indian disinformation campaign that has been going on for the last, few years over the facts that it's always been their contention that the allegations have been made
Hmm.
up first by Prime Minister Trudeau, and then they doubled down and said when the RCMP went public with their presser that also was made up, and now
Yeah.
they're continuing to say it. So in my mind, it's like progressives tend to, I mean, everybody kind of tends to split into two types. You're either a fighter or a folder. And I didn't come up with this. I think it was Brad Lander. He ran against Mamdani in the New York mayoral campaign.
Okay.
But he said progressives, what we need are, like, right now, the Democratic Party are a bunch of folders. And I would say right now, everybody's folding. We need fighters. And you need to fight against these moments of like organized disinformation or like chipping away at more vulnerable groups. And I would expect a capital L liberal government to want to fight for those sorts of things and to stand up for those, sorts of causes and people.
Yeah.
And it is incredibly disappointing that you're not seeing that. But so to your point about being worried, we should be worried. But unfortunately, I don't find it that surprising.
No, no, and I think that's, I guess, indicative of the moment that we're in. That progressive politicians have a hard time, just, I guess, pushing back against the disinformation. And I mean, it's one of my constant frustrations watching.
I mean, we were bad at it
Just,
too, in fairness. Like,
yeah, no, you know,
yeah,
and I mean, I had my thing about, like, just under the Trudeau era, it was always like happy clappy good news pablum, and nowadays it's mostly nothing. They're mostly not saying anything at all, and when you've got politicians who are just making stuff up, and whether it's inflation or anything like that, not pushing back against this stuff just kind of lets it fester, but they keep refusing to do that.
yeah. I mean, I would say in defense of the MPs and politicians themselves that don't. I think from their respect, they would say they do it. That they
Yeah,
do. They're either they in some way, whether they're giving an answer at a presser or a tweet, or like a social post or whatever, they would
yeah,
say that. I think what they generally fail to understand is the overall information ecosystem and the way that people consume information nowadays, right? Just
yeah,
because you've said something once somewhere in passing doesn't mean it's going to saturate down to the average, voter or,
yeah,
Canadian even. So I think that is probably a large issue here. And then I would also say that, and this is a failure of, I think, journalism as a bit of an institution, but legacy journalism in particular tends to both sides everything to the point of absurdity.
yeah,
And I think,
yeah.
and I
Not
think
going to
that,
get no arguments from me on that one.
yeah, and I think a lot of it probably stems from this, contention of like, well, is journalism there for accuracy or veracity? So,
Yeah,
like, are you there as a journalist to confirm that somebody was, at the accurate location, time, place, saying, the X words coming out of, their mouth, and that is what's being reported? Or should you then be deciding, whether or not it was truthful in nature or factual in nature?
yeah,
I tend to naturally lead towards the side of like, just say what's factually, objectively, demonstrably true, given, evidence available, and leave it at that. And then you can let the reader decide, or the audience, whatever, decide.
yeah.
But I don't even think we're doing that because
Not a
what I'm,
lot, no.
right? Like, and again, I'll go back to the carbon tax as a good example. But often the claims of it increasing, grocery prices or what have you would be just repeated uncritically
Yeah,
without the caveat of like, well, it's not actually shown to be doing that. And also there's a rebate involved that people were
yeah,
getting, right? So
yeah.
yeah.
No, I hear you, and it's my constant frustration as well. Which, yeah, I guess part of it is just like the fact that the government has not recognized that the media is not going to explain it for them, and so they need to actually do that themselves. But they have shown little interest in wanting to do that. So unfortunately, that's kind of helped to create the situation in which we're in right now.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think we're probably at our time, but this has been a really interesting conversation, and you've given me some new. The fighting and folding thing, I think I'm going to have to use a little more.
It's a good one. I'll send you the clip. It's Brad Lander said it in like an interview where
Yeah,
he
for
was like,
sure.
"We're either fighter or folders," and it's like, yeah, man, we need fighters.
All right. Well, thanks for doing this, and we'll talk again in the future.
Thanks, Dale.
And that's everything for this week. Join us again next week for some more Canadian politics. I'm Dale Smith. It's at journo_Dale on Twitter and journodale no underscore on Bluesky. And don't forget to like the video, share, subscribe, and support us on Patreon. Thanks, everyone.